Thank you, Anna, and thanks everybody for joining us. Really welcome to this first of our Fall Public Service Award celebrations. Obviously, this is a slightly different kind of experience than we normally would have, but I'm just delighted to congratulate Katrina Island for receiving our Rubin Public Service Award this year. Even as a student, Katrina's commitment, her passion, her intelligence always just shone through, and it was a delight to know her then and to have watched her amazing career take off. We always knew, I think, that she would achieve really, really amazing and important, impactful work on behalf of the clients, the communities, and the causes that inspired her to come to Stanford Law School to begin with. So congratulations, Katrina. I could not be more proud of you and more pleased for you. Yes, to the students, I would just highlight that now is not a time to doubt the power of public interest law in our society and our world. In fact, it's a time to embrace the paths that you're all selecting and to really accept the power that it will give you, again, to serve these important clients. So I look forward to celebrating all of Katrina's achievements and to be inspired by her words, and to celebrate and be inspired next week by Amanda Alexander, who will receive our National Public Service Award. So again, thanks so much for joining us. Now we will hear briefly from Dean Jenny Martinez before we hear the wise words of Katrina Island. And as Anna said, please stick around for the questions and answers at the end. So thanks, everyone.
Welcome everyone to the first event in our Fall Public Service Award Series. Every year, the law school community takes an opportunity to reconnect after the summer, highlight public service, and introduce the newest members of our community to inspiring role models in public service. Normally, we would host a formal dinner to celebrate the accomplishments of two outstanding public interest attorneys, but this isn't a typical year. Nevertheless, we're delighted we can still gather virtually to celebrate public service. We will honor two outstanding public interest attorneys, and each has agreed to participate in a series of events. This week, we had the opportunity to spotlight our Miles L. Rubin Public Interest Award recipient. Miles Rubin is a graduate of the law school's class of 1952 and a longtime supporter who helped fund our Loan Repayment Assistance Program, or LRAP. Thanks to a gift from his children, John, Kim, Richard, and Todd, the award recognizes an alumnus who has demonstrated courage in challenging social inequity and promoting positive solutions for social change. I'm thrilled to honor Katrina Island, a 2010 graduate, as this year's Miles L. Rubin Public Interest Award recipient. Katrina is the managing attorney of the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project's California office. Over the past 3.5 years, during one of the most challenging periods in recent history for immigrants' rights, Katrina has distinguished herself as a tenacious civil rights litigator and a leader in the fight to achieve justice for marginalized communities. Katrina has been counsel in more than 24 lawsuits in federal court, several of which have challenged immigration enforcement abuses by federal and local law enforcement agencies. In particular, the successful challenge to the government's arbitrary termination of deferred action for childhood arrival grants. She obtained an injunction requiring the government provide notice and an opportunity to be heard before terminating any class members' DACA. She spent hundreds of hours speaking about her experience with their attorneys, listening to their stories, and providing technical expertise for their individual cases. As a result of Katrina's creative body advocacy, hundreds of young immigrants have developed a workplace story. Inspired by Chicago and other struggles as a food service entrepreneur, Katrina gained access after working as immigration paralegal received training predominantly in working immigration workers. After working for U.S. District Judge T.E. Ellison, Katrina was civil rights fellow at Gold T. Morgan for 2012 to 2014, where she worked on a variety of civil rights cases. In 2014, she won the Voting Rights Award from the ACLU of Southern California for her successful representation of Latinx voters in a challenge to Anaheim's at-large election system in Moreno versus City of Anaheim. Katrina also served as an associate at another private public interest firm, Uten and Golden, representing victims of employment discrimination and other types of workplace exploitation before she joined the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project in 2017. Katrina was nominated by colleagues who spoke at length of her stellar legal abilities, passion for social justice, and deep commitment to her clients. We're so delighted to recognize her this week for the incredible impact she's already had in the 10 short years since her graduation, and look forward to all that is to come. Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much, Diane and Dee Martinez. That is a wonderful introduction. I just wanted to start by saying good afternoon, everyone. I really do sincerely wish that I could be there in person with all of you to accept this really lovely award, which is probably hard to see, but you know, it is incredibly meaningful, and I would love to be there to connect with this cherished community of current and future public interest lawyers and the fantastic staff and faculty that support us. But we'll make do with Zoom, as we have been doing for these past 7 or so months, and we'll continue to do for some time. I feel like at this point I've sort of become one with Zoom, and Zoom has become one with me. And I hope none of you will submit my Zoom background here to the Twitter account that apparently rates such things, as I feel like I wouldn't fare very well, maybe a 1 out of 10. But in all seriousness, I wanted to begin these remarks by just expressing how deeply meaningful this award is to me. I remember as a law student, you know, more than 10 years ago, as Dee Martinez mentioned, yikes, attending the dinner in which the inaugural Miles L. Rubin Award was given out. I recall being so impressed, first and foremost, by the fancy food and drink, which apologies to all of you who are not getting to enjoy that this year. But also, you know, more importantly, I was in awe of the work of the recipient, Julia Wilson's work that she was doing at One Justice at the time. And I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams that I would one day be the recipient of that same award. It's truly an honor. And it means especially a lot to receive this award right now. Doing immigrants' rights impact litigation is difficult in any era. It can be stressful and grueling, and there's just so much at stake for our clients that it can just be incredibly stressful. And during a pandemic where I'm isolated from my dear colleagues who usually provide me with such tremendous support, has been, you know, incredibly trying. And this award has really buoyed my spirits and made me feel, you know, renew my commitment to working towards justice for immigrant communities, even where at times it feels like that's really far away. And back to that in a moment. But first I want to thank some wonderful people without whom I could not be doing the work I'm doing today. And, you know, I want to begin by thanking the Rubin family for this award, not only that, but also for their incredible vision and generosity in helping start the LRAP program, which has allowed an entire generation of public interest lawyers to pursue their dreams and make meaningful impacts in so many different areas of law. I really hope that we're making you proud of your investment in us. And I want to thank, you know, I have some really deep gratitude for the education that I received at Stanford Law School and the incredible people that really supported me. And that includes people like Professor Jayshree Srikantaya. You know, Jayshree gave me the best foundation I could have imagined for being a civil rights litigator, and I really found a home in the Immigrants' Rights Clinic. And she's remained a cherished mentor over the years, and I often think of bits of wisdom that she's given me over the years, including even the parts that were kind of hard to hear at the time, like you should be geographically flexible with your clerkship search, the dreaded geographic flexibility. But I frequently share many tidbits of advice that she's given me with other students. And the Levin Center, especially Diane and Anna, who brought so much cutting edge programming to the law school, where I learned so much about the different areas of public interest work, and how they expertly advised us through the twists and turns of the sometimes challenging public interest job search. Professor Norm Spalding, who not only made CivPro and Fed Courts come to life from behind the lectern, but who also took the time to get to know me outside of class and encourage me to work through my sometimes debilitating self-doubt and to really step into my power. And I'm really grateful for that. I came to Stanford feeling a little bit out of sorts, like I sort of didn't belong in this place where there were a lot of people who'd attended elite private institutions and who had parents who were law professors and Congress people. And Professor Spalding really pushed me to believe in myself. Outside of Stanford, I owe so much to my brilliant and fearless colleagues at the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, especially my former supervisor, Jennifer Chang Newell, also SLS alum. I am in awe of their tenacity, creativity, and compassion during difficult times. I've learned so much from working alongside them, and I'm so grateful that they push me every day to be a better advocate. It also includes people like the Honorable Keith Ellison, for whom I clerked on the district court. I remember people telling me that a year with Judge Ellison was worth moving to the hinterlands of Houston, Texas for, and I'm so glad I listened to them. Boy, was it worth it. Judge Ellison's generosity and commitment to achieving justice continues to inspire me, and his unwavering belief in me has made me feel like I can do seemingly impossible things like take on the Trump administration. And last but not least, I want to thank my parents, whose own example of serving others ignited the same passion in me and who have given me boundless support over the years. Finally, I'm really honored to share the virtual stage, even though our events are sort of separated this year, with Amanda Alexander, whose innovative racial justice movement work is really worth celebrating every day, but now more than ever. And I think her work is a really good reminder to take a moment to situate the fight for immigrant communities in the broader context of the movement for racial justice in this country. The same deep-seated, systemic, such structural racism that's behind police killings and mass incarceration of Black people suffuses the Trump administration's efforts to push Black and brown immigrant youth and temporary protected status holders out of this country, to callously separate asylum-seeking parents like our client, Miss L, from their children, and to ban Muslims from this country, just to name a few. But long before Trump came on the scene, our immigration system has imported the defects and deep racial disparities of our criminal justice system into deportation decisions. And as even long-term permanent residents can be expelled from the only home they've known for even minor offenses. And Black immigrants are disproportionately impacted by these harsh rules. They're more likely to be deported based on criminal convictions and detained in immigration detention centers. And it's important, I think, to uplift these common threads in these movements: law enforcement abuses, overuse of incarceration, and the ripping apart of families and communities. And while there's always been anti-immigrant racism in this country, more or less overt at any given time, its putrid core has really been cleaved open by the Trump administration's actions on immigration. We've witnessed an unprecedented, relentless assault on immigrants' rights over the past 3.5 years. And although there have been tough battles in every administration, there's something truly different in the scale and intensity of the current assault, of the cruelty and inhumanity of the policies. The policies that I just mentioned, family separation, the attempt to end DACA and TPS for many countries, the Muslim ban, these are just a few of the actions that have captured the national attention, that have kind of struck a chord of outrage to such a degree that people take note. But the media's forgotten or ignored many of the other major issues that have impacted immigrant communities. In July, the Migration Policy Institute issued a report cataloging the Trump administration's actions on immigration. And spoiler alert, the report is very long. It's over 120 pages, and it's extremely depressing. There have been more than 400 executive actions on immigration in under 4 years. It feels like we've forgotten, even in progressive circles, about some of these devastating policies. For example, the public charge wealth test for becoming a resident, and the fact that there are still thousands of asylum seekers stranded in Mexico waiting for asylum hearings that they may never get. In highly dangerous places like Tamaulipas, where there's a level 4 State Department travel advisory, where a lack of access to counsel and basic due process is the least of asylum seekers' worries. The grossly misnamed Migrant Protection Protocols program is just one of the handful of interlocking ways that Trump has tried to end asylum, by attempting to bar asylum for cases related to domestic violence and gang violence, the 2 asylum bans, the first based on unlawful entry, the second based on someone transiting through a third country, and the asylum cooperative agreements, which again, major misnomers, that allow the administration to play musical chairs with asylum seekers' lives. And, we can't forget, as Dean Martinez mentioned, that the administration has been trying to terminate individual DACA grants, even as it's trying to rescind the entire program, making the existing grants less secure at the time, at the same time that there's so much uncertainty in undocumented youth lives. And being a part of fighting many of these policies has been an incredibly great honor, but it has also admittedly been exhausting, in part because it feels a bit like playing whack-a-mole with a new awful policy popping up before the ink has dried on the injunction from the first. And we and other advocates have had a mixed record. We've successfully halted many policies like family separation, the first asylum ban, the systemic failure to release asylum seekers who have passed credible fear interviews. And there are other cases where we've won temporarily only to be overturned by the Supreme Court. And there's so much work to do that it feels overwhelming and sometimes disheartening to feel like you're just barely treading water while things are getting worse for your clients and the community. And it's a bit of a strange time to be giving these remarks because we don't yet know what will happen with the election. And the outcome will largely determine the direction that immigration policy takes from here. But even if Trump is voted out next month, we have such a long way to go to achieve real justice for immigrant communities. In addition to having to push Biden to sort of undo many of the Trump policies, our immigration system is full of many other horrors that didn't originate with Trump. We're a country that rounds up and detains tens of thousands of immigrants every day, including families. We still lack a path to citizenship for undocumented youth, and our immigration courts are broken. In addition to more arcane things like jurisdictional bars that make it so sometimes it's impossible to hold the executive accountable even for blatantly unlawful actions. But this is why we need you. Regardless of the outcome of the election, as Diane said, this is not a time to sort of lose faith in the ability of public interest lawyers to make a difference. The immigrants' rights movement needs your brilliance, your creativity, and most importantly, your resilience. And I know, this talk is about resilience, and I promise I'm getting there. When I launched my civil rights career, I didn't understand how important this particular characteristic, resilience, would be, and how I need to continue building my capacity for resilience every step of the way, both personally and professionally. There's a tendency to see people in positions like mine and think that their path must have been straight and without false starts or struggles, but that's often not the case, and that's certainly not the case for me. I spent much of my time in law school preparing for a career to do immigrants' rights work, and it didn't work out as I planned when I graduated. I didn't get a project-based fellowship to work with my current employer, the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project, and they couldn't hire me as a staff attorney at the time, and many other organizations were facing funding shortages due to the Great Recession. And I had to pivot quickly. I had to make a decision. I had to reframe my mindset about what it meant that I hadn't gotten the job that I wanted. Did it mean I was a failure? Did it mean I wasn't meant to do the work that I felt called to do? But I'm glad I didn't give in to those thoughts. And instead, I listened to the great advice that I got from folks here at the law school to take the opportunity to work at a progressive private public interest firm where I could hone my research skills, my writing skills, my advocacy skills, and really learn how to work with clients to build impact cases, to learn how to build litigation from the ground up. And I got to do cutting edge work on behalf of low-wage immigrant workers, to hold contractors, labor contractors accountable. I got to do voting rights work, as you heard. And I volunteered at immigration and employment clinics at Centro Legal in Oakland to make sure my language skills were sharp and I was staying connected to the community. And I hope that one day I'd have the opportunity to circle back and get back to the work that I really felt called to do. And in 2016, when Trump was elected, I realized I had to make a move. It turned out that the finely tuned federal district court litigation skills that I'd been developing for years were exactly what they needed as they were gearing up to face this onslaught from the Trump administration. And I reflect often that if I'd given up on immigrants' rights work because of my personal disappointment and didn't continue to position myself all the time to be in a position to jump back into the work, I wouldn't be probably standing here today. And I think resilience is also important because the work is really hard. I will not mince words about that. And real change does not happen overnight, as you know. It doesn't come after one lawsuit or even a series of lawsuits. And sometimes gains made over years can be erased in an instant or feel like they've been erased in an instant. As just one example, after the pandemic hit, the administration saw its chess move, use the pandemic as a pretext to close the southern border and do under the guise of public health what it hadn't been able to achieve otherwise. And as we know from recent reporting, as we suspected, this wasn't really based on public health at all, but was rather a Stephen Miller special, as they call it, meant to keep immigrants from coming to this country. We're currently litigating a case with partners challenging the application of that policy to unaccompanied children. But the reality is that right now, many asylum seekers are being expelled from this country without any kind of process at all. And it's hard not to be defeatist in these moments. And some of you may be wondering, well, isn't there a good reason to be? Will federal courts remain a useful tool to protect communities like immigrants after 4 years of Trump judicial appointments and our current, what we're sort of witnessing unfold before us and jamming through a Supreme Court nomination? And I don't really have an answer to that. I don't really have a crystal ball about how all of that will play out. But what I do know, and I firmly believe, is that the federal courts will always have their place in a movement strategy. And we need to use all the tools that are at our disposal. We need to continue changing the narrative around immigration using the media, the legislative process, individual conversations. As the labor activist Dolores Huerta once said, every moment is an organizing opportunity, every person a potential activist, every minute a chance to change the world. And with the courts, we found that at the very least, we can throw sand in the gears of the machine, even if we can't stop it. But I don't take this, talking about this halting and snaking process lightly. And I can only imagine the impact that all of this has on directly impacted communities. But for me, it's been a continued reminder to build my resilience to be able to stay in the fight. I try not to give into doomsday predictions and to resist hopelessness all the time. And I think sometimes about how during my 3L year and my clerkship, how Dukes and Concepcion, two really important Supreme Court cases, came out, and everyone thought that would signal the death knell for class actions. So essentially, we would have no more class actions available as a tool to hold employers and corporations accountable. But you know what? Advocates have continued to fight. I was a part of many of those fights, fighting arbitration agreements, compelled arbitration, fighting about, what the Rule 23 standards are after Dukes. And, when I feel my will failing, I try to think about, guess what? There are still class actions and we are still holding employers and corporations accountable. And I also take inspiration from the immigrant youth movement, who've had such an astonishing impact. They've organized to demand DACA, and they've refused to make compromises that hurt others in the community. And in working with advocates like United We Dream in my work, I've just gained so much faith in the power of communities to demand change. And I always, try, as Diane mentioned, to reconnect with why I became a lawyer and why it is so meaningful to me to have this privilege and the power that I have as a lawyer. Even though we don't always win, our work can literally be life-changing for many of our clients and class members. I think about our client Carmen and Jay, which are pseudonyms, a mother and little girl who are plaintiffs in our challenge to the government's efforts to end asylum for domestic violence and gang violence. They were erroneously deported by the government in violation of representations that the government made to the district court judge in our case. During the hearing, when we were literally in court seeking a stay of their deportation, pending a ruling on the merits, we learned that they were actually already in the air, en route to their home country. And right then and there, when we raised it with the judge, he was shocked and appalled at the government's conduct. And right there, the judge ordered the government to turn the plane around immediately and bring our clients back to the country. That is the power that we have as lawyers, the power to turn a plane around. And as the judge noted during the hearing, our clients were the lucky ones who had lawyers who were literally pleading their case in court while they were being spirited away. And, you know, we wonder, you know, how does the government treat others who don't have the same access to lawyers? And today, like nearly all of our other clients in that lawsuit, the mother and daughter have had their erroneous credible fear decisions reversed and have been released from a detention and now have a fair shot at seeking asylum. And countless other immigrants like them have a meaningful chance. And I sometimes think about how terrifying that must have been for Carmen and Jay to be ripped from their room in the middle of the night while they were pleading to the officer that they were not supposed to be deported and that they feared returning to their country, and how absolutely hopeless I would be in that moment. But, you know, Carmen and Jay have not lost hope, and, you know, they are here and they are fighting, and I take a lot of inspiration from them, and it often, you know, pulls me forward. And when I feel my will failing, I really do try to remember that. And I have a few more things that I wanted to say about some just sort of practical tips for sort of building resilience. And, you know, what's that? Did somebody want to say something? I just wanted to go through some practical tips about, you know, sort of how, when times are tough, I have tried to build resilience, and some advice for students as they're embarking on these careers and making choices about their public interest career. And, you know, I think the first one is, you know, to really set boundaries for yourself. There's a culture in the legal profession, and particularly in the public interest litigation space, that sort of valorizes overwork and that really demands personal sacrifice. And there is a certain amount of work that is driven by deadlines, and there are unavoidable fire drills. But I've learned that to make it in the long term, you really do have to carve out space for yourself, as painful as it is sometimes, to erect those boundaries. And you have to care for your mental health and put that first so that you can be there in the long run for your clients. I think second, I think you don't have to know everything. I think there's this feeling going into doing public interest work that you should know everything about the area of law that you're jumping into, but you don't have to have all the answers all the time, and trying to pretend like you do or being worried that you don't is exhausting and really detracts from important work that you could be doing. It is okay to be constantly learning new things and building your substantive knowledge. And if you surround yourself with other bright people who have a team mentality, you work together and you can collectively move mountains. And another thing I'd say is just really share in your victories and defeats with your colleagues. And remember, whenever there is a big loss, everyone is feeling it as deeply as you are. And when there is a victory, they are celebrating right there along with you. And also, and this one really hits home for me, it's really important to leave your sort of counterproductive perfectionism at the door. You have to be kind to yourself for making mistakes and think of your development as a sort of constant, you know, growth cycle. A lot of us got to places like Stanford Law School by pushing ourselves really hard, always striving for better. And, you know, we learned that we couldn't cut ourselves any slack. Our work has to be perfect 100% of the time. But that kind of thinking has let me down at some point. And, you know, I've learned that this work is hard and you have to have compassion for yourself and others to avoid burnout and compassion fatigue for your clients. And I promise you that forgiving yourself for your failings does not take away your edge. It really pushes you to improve and do better. And, you know, another one is to do things you're scared of. Take risks, push yourself, even when you feel like you're going to be sick. I'll admit that I still get very nervous before any court appearance, and I don't know that that will ever go away. You know, really speak your truth, even if your voice shakes, as mine frequently does. You can't be afraid of failure. It will keep you from doing important things for people that really need your courage. Because failing or losing is not the end. You always got to, pick yourself up and keep going. And I'd say have a plan, a strategy, but accept that there's always going to be uncertainty. Best laid plans can be upended in an instant. Judge issues an order, the government issues a new memo that supersedes the one you were challenging. It's really hard, but try to stay flexible and not get attached to the way that you thought something would play out. And then finally, really know your worth. Don't be afraid of having different strengths than other people, even if your organization maybe doesn't seem to value them all equally. We really need everyone's strengths to move the movement forward. So thank you so much for this award. It's incredibly meaningful to me. I really appreciate everyone's kind words, and I'd love to answer any questions that the audience has.
Thank you so much, Katrina. If folks would like to raise your hand, I will call on you, or feel free to private chat me any questions. Bree, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for all the work that you do and for sharing a bit of your story with us. Perhaps not a totally inspiring question, but I was curious about if you had any kind of like specific advice around setting boundaries in your life. Like, are there like specific tips you have? Do you turn your phone off for at a certain time of day over the weekend? Like, I already am scared of having no boundaries. And so if you do have any kind of practical tips, that would be wonderful.
It's a very good question. I have to say, I'm not that great at it yet, which is why this is I'm forgiving myself for my failings. I've been working on it for a long time. And I think the number one thing that I try to stay conscious of is like what I'm doing driven by some sort of amorphous guilt, or is there like an actual task that I really do need to execute at this moment? Because I do find that there is like frequently this like sense of dread that comes over me, or some sort of amorphous sense that I should be doing more, or there's something else I need to do. But, I try at the end of the day to like go through my checklist and think like, okay, I've done this, I've done that. These were all the must-dos that I had today. Is there anything else on this list that I really do think I need to get done today, or it will make something significantly easier for me later this week? And, I can avoid being crunched if I do this right now. And then I sort of try to weigh, is that if I do it now, is it sort of cutting into something I would have otherwise liked to do in my personal life? And, is it going to mean I don't exercise today, which is really important for me? And I really try to like interrogate the to-do list all the time. And sometimes even just like vocalize the way that I'm feeling, like, oh, I feel like you guys have been really busy on this other case and I've had it relatively easy for the last few weeks. And I'm just feeling like a little bit of guilt, and like more likely than not, the person is like, you had your fire drilled, the month before that. It's your turn to take a break. So, don't feel guilty about it. And it's a lot of times it is something within us and not the actual work driving the emergency. And I do think it is important to talk, when you have organizations that, you make collective decisions, and most nonprofits, and even at a lot of plaintiff side firms, you make collective decisions about what cases to bring, usually with a litigation memo. And you have to not be afraid to sometimes raise like, should we talk about resources? Do we really have the resources on the team right now? Do we have a whole team? Can we think of the 4 people that actually have room on their plate to take this on? What does the timing look like? And actually, not be afraid to have those conversations, because I think a lot of times other people around the table are also very concerned about the resource constraints, and they're very appreciative when somebody brings it up. And that may not always work. There have been times when we all decided we didn't really have the resources, but collectively decided to do it anyway, for whatever reason, because it was something that we felt we had unique expertise in, or it dovetailed with something we were already doing and we felt like we kind of needed to. but it's hard and you have to keep at it. And I think things like practical things like turning your phone off or leaving it behind when you go, on a walk with family or, something that you're trying to do to be present, to not bring your phone with you. And to even just communicate to people when you're unavailable, just to say like, I'm not going to be available at all. And only text me in case of an absolute emergency. I do think things like that help. And I think also, and this seems like such a small thing, but scheduling vacations far in advance and like putting them on the books as soon as you take a vacation, putting the next one on the books, so that you can really, you can actually, carve the time out in advance. Because I find the thing that ends up sort of spoiling vacations for people is sort of like not spending the time to carve it out and to then protect it. Because when court deadlines change and you think you're planning your case around or your vacation around a particular hearing, and then the judge moves the hearing, and you sort of just have to buy the tickets, commit to it, and carve out the time. And I think my colleagues have been very supportive of that, especially as we all really are. There's a growing recognition that burnout is very real, and we don't want to lose people that have incredible institutional knowledge because of burnout.
Thank you.
Katrina, thank you, Bree. Sarah, you're next.
Thanks so much for being here. I have a question about guilt as a new lawyer in particular. I struggled a lot with that this summer as a public defender, where it felt like the stakes were so high for my clients, and I was just either useless or certainly not as good as any more experienced attorney. How have you handled that?
So the guilt coming, or the concern coming from feeling like you're not up to the challenge, or just feeling like you should work harder and do more to sort of compensate for the fact that you're new?
The latter, just like not being good enough yet.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a certain amount of, in the first couple of years that I was practicing during my clerkship and then the first 2 years, the learning curve is really steep. So there's a certain amount of it that is unavoidable when you're learning, where you feel like, it might be hard to keep your, quite frankly, it's hard to keep your work week to a 40-hour work week sometimes when you're first starting out. But you do have to check whether you're just sort of obsessively going over something over and over again because you're nervous and because it's coming from some like sense of perfectionism and sort of like lack of confidence, or whether you really think that there are stones that are not yet turned over and that you really need to do a little more research because you don't feel like, you've really actually exhausted it. I mean, you do have to kind of constantly check yourself to sort of figure out where it's coming from, whether it's just like nerves and I don't feel prepared not because I'm not prepared, but because I feel the sort of obsessive need to go back over my notes over and over again. So it is really hard. And I think talking to other people, other like friends from law school, I think, I am friends with a lot of really wonderful women from Stanford that I've continued to be friends with. And when you sort of see that they're all struggling with the same thing, makes you feel a little bit better, that it's not just you, that we're all sort of struggling to find the balance. But I think, you do have to have confidence in yourself and, make sure you're getting regular feedback from people that you're working with so that you can see if it's actually, if they're affirming, no, you're on the right track, you're doing the right things, you're thinking of the right possible problems and attacking them. Then, you sort of have a better sense that maybe the sort of lack of confidence or worries are coming from some other place and not from like a real concern that you don't know enough. So yeah, I would highly recommend looking for mentors in your first jobs and people who you feel confident will tell it like it is, who will tell you when you're doing really well and that, really give you a boost of confidence and say like, I believe in you when you go up there for that first argument, because that can go a really long way. And also people who will tell you, no, I think this needs more work. I think you need to dive into this problem, or, I think this is a part of your skill set that you need to brush up and keep practicing. And, because if you don't have that connection and you're not getting that kind of feedback, you can kind of go, adrift and get in your own head and worry that you're failing your client somehow. When in reality, a lot of times you're doing just fine.
Thank you. Philip, you're next.
Yeah, hi, Katrina. Thank you for your comments and congratulations on your award. I think we are probably going to be graduating in a similar economic conditions as when you graduated. And so I've been thinking a lot about, first job out of law school. I'm wondering, it seems from your story that you looked at the ACLU and you applied for a public fellowship, and when that didn't work out, you went to a PPI firm. I'm wondering what you think about direct representation through NGOs or through sort of more local organizations.
Oh yeah, I think that's great. Those jobs also weren't available back then, unfortunately. It's a very different landscape, as I think Diane was sort of alluding to. So, there are similar sort of, issues in terms of an economic downturn in both of these eras. But when I was applying for jobs back in 2010, 2011, there just really wasn't any money in immigrants' rights work at all. There were these organizations were really poorly funded. Just as an example, at Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto, there was one attorney that did deportation defense half-time, just to give you a sense of how different it is now. There were no universal representation units, there was no knife up in New York. And so there weren't even opportunities to do deportation defense. Like I would have loved to do detained removal defense, for instance, somewhere in the Bay Area, and that just didn't exist. Now you have Centro Legal, you have a bunch of other organizations that have 10, 15 lawyers. And so there are just more opportunities to start with than I had. So I just want to put that out there. But in terms of, and so I don't think all of those are going to contract. I'm not seeing the kind of contraction that I think some people were really worried about at the beginning. It just hasn't been super obvious. And, obviously it's still sort of playing out, but I do think there will still be opportunities in the immigrants' rights field in a way that there weren't when I was graduating. So that is sort of why I made the leap to do private public interest work, because I had wanted to do impact work, and it felt like there was a lot of overlap in sort of plaintiff side work where you're working with clients closely. You're learning their stories, you're getting their facts, you're writing declarations, you're drafting complaints, you're doing a lot of pretrial motions. A lot of the cases that Goldstein Borgen did, and also out in Golden, they litigate a lot in federal court. So, immigration issues, they're gonna be in federal court. And so I really looked for opportunities. Some of my work was in state court, like the California Voting Rights Act stuff, but I really wanted to get an opportunity to feel what it felt like to litigate in federal court, to learn all the rules and the tricks of the trade. And so that's why I decided to go with the PI firm route instead of going into direct services, both because I was interested in litigating, but also because there were no removal defense jobs at the time. I had done my 2L summer. I actually went up to the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project up in Seattle, because at the time, they were one of the only places on the West Coast that had a serious immigration, removal defense unit, and had a unit that worked directly in the Northwest Detention Center. And so I would have gladly done that out of law school, but I was trying to stay in the Bay Area. So, those were some of the considerations that I went through, but I think also just general tips for an economic downturn. And trying to find employment is just to be really persistent. It is hard because a lot of us who are used to being successful and sort of getting jobs that we apply for, getting into schools that we apply for, it can be sort of a really uncomfortable rude awakening to feel oh wow, I'm going to be in this competition with other people, it feels like. And you have to sort of, again, get out of your head and stop worrying about, what's going on with other people, or who's getting what jobs, because I let that affect me a lot, and I wish I could go back in time and stop worrying about that, and just to be really persistent and sort of network. I hate the word networking, as I've told some other students this week, and I find networking really uncomfortable. I'm not a natural, and I find that I really need authentic connection with people in order to ask them for anything, even just an introduction to someone. And so I do think being true to yourself and finding the ways that you feel comfortable, forming relationships with people that might have connections with various jobs, professors here at the law school, clinical professors, even in the pro bono projects that you might be working on, outside of the law school, people that you like and connect with and respect. It's totally okay. And I felt very uncomfortable with this in law school. It's totally okay to say hey, do you want to have coffee for 20 minutes. I'd like to, see if you might have any ideas for me, in how to move forward with my job search. And I did not do enough of that. And, I didn't learn that until later. And I have, a lot of things that have happened, including me being able to come back to the ACLU were happened because I stayed in touch with people that I really liked. When I didn't get the fellowship, they were my sponsor. I'd worked really closely with them on all my essays and my project proposal. And so over the years, I stayed in touch with them, just to say like, hey, how are things going? Any jobs open? And it finally worked after, 5 or 6 years. But, there was a part of me also that, if Trump hadn't been elected, I really enjoyed the work that I was doing also, and so like my path went in this direction that I hadn't intended, but the work I did at Goldstein, Borgen and Outen and Golden was awesome. Some of these firms have, Outen in particular has a ton of resources, and they can bring cases that many other firms can't bring, like cutting edge gender discrimination cases that most other firms would like run away from screaming because of the investment of money and lawyer resources that it takes to litigate against Goldman Sachs or against Microsoft. And so they have a lot of advantages too. So I think just being flexible, being persistent, networking, even if it makes you uncomfortable, and just believing in yourself, because not getting the job that you want is not at all a reflection of your talent. And that was really hard for me to learn, but there's so much chance involved, and there are so many other factors beyond your control that you just sort of have to give yourself a little grace. And, for many of you, it will all work out the way that you planned. But even if it doesn't, I promise that you will be okay.
Thanks, Katrina. Does anyone else have a question?
It looks like Christina has a question.
Hi, yeah, I'm Christina. So I just wanted to say hi and ask sort of, this is a kind of different question, but for, I guess people who would like to be academics like me, sort of, how can we still help, even though like the work is like not as applied and like you're not working with clients like on a day-to-day basis, but like how can we sort of make academic research still useful?
Whew, that's a really good question, Christina. It's lovely to see you, by the way. Christina and I worked together, is that 2 summers ago now? The summer of 2018, actually during the summer when Carmen and Jay became our plaintiffs, and Christina was instrumental in that project. That is a really good question. And I think that the way that we have mostly, as you know, sort of worked with academics over the last few years has been on data science. Has been on sort of like trying to figure out what the government's data means. It's often very confusing and, jumbled, and trying to see if we can discern trends or if there are things that we were otherwise missing in the data, things like, in our parole case, where we were trying to argue that the government wasn't following the parole release guidance for people who had passed credible fear interviews. A lot of that was sort of like showing a like statistically significant, like extreme drop off in grants. And so that's mostly the way that we've collaborated with academics. And, I think in terms of, the other academic research, like the sort of like law review kind of academic research, a lot of what's been sort of, some of it's coming from the other side. But a lot of the research has been on things like, nationwide injunctions, and the origin of the APA, and, sort of what set-aside relief in the APA is supposed to mean. Does it always mean vacating the rule? And there's been all of this sort of like back and forth literature on, from both sides that has been sort of terrifying to see play out as we're litigating these issues. And I'll see, something come out from the other side, and it sort of like causes me to be seized with anxiety. And then there will be a response from somebody who, sort of supports the positions that we're taking in litigation. And it's sort of like, okay, there's like some relief. So a lot of these issues, I think because there's been so much APA litigation, also, you know, the Administrative Procedure Act, we're sort of trying to hold the agency accountable under this statute that allows us to sue for actions that are contrary to law and, you know, arbitrary and capricious, et cetera, that we have had to lean a lot on APA academics as well. And obviously, things like our Troisingham case, and, you know, which was an unfortunate loss, you know, really big loss at the Supreme Court recently. You know, a lot of that work in sort of developing the arguments at the Supreme Court, a lot of that came from, you know, academic work on the history of habeas. And we really drew from a lot of academic literature in that case as well. And in the asylum context as well, like Debbie Anker at Harvard, and there's been a lot of other people whose academic work we've relied on, but it's been more like substantive expertise in each of these different areas. And it sort of has taken different turns depending on sort of what we're doing at any given time. I think we've relied on some ethics research, you know, sort of like professors writing in ethics in various cases, trying to figure out tricky ethics questions. So it certainly has, we turn to law review articles frequently and to all kinds of academic literature, but it's hard to know like how to predict what is going to be useful in the future. I only sort of know sort of what we've been like, you know, glommed onto and the people that we've sort of frantically reached out to. But that sort of may be a reflection of how reactionary we've been just more generally. As I've talked with some students this week, you know, it's been an unfortunate part of working in this space during the Trump administration is that we found ourselves sort of reacting quite a bit to what the administration is doing and not sort of like forging our own path forward and sort of what kinds of work we want to do in the future.
Well, thank you. That was really helpful. And I like the APA and I'm doing research on the APA, so at least it might someday be useful.
Definitely useful. I'm not sure if it's my internet or not, but I unfortunately didn't hear that.
Oh, I said my internet's unstable. Apologies. Does anyone have one last question? All right, with that, then I will say thank you so much, Katrina, for spending the week with us and sharing more about your story and your accomplishments and inspiring all of our students. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for Katrina.
Thank you. I appreciate you all.
Thank you, Katrina.
Good luck, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about career path stuff. Anna has my contact information.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.